First, oh, should I restart? Okay. First item on the agenda is the roll call to determine a quorum. Maria?
Ms. Aldine,
Here?
Mr. DeCara,
Here.
Ms. Dis, Mr. Honigman,
Here.
Ms. Lane. Here. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. The members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for March 22nd, 2023. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking Raise Hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote committee members, we have one this morning, Gabriel. If you wish to speak, you can also now raise your hand in Zoom. You will find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would also like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they are able to do so. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment. You will be called on to speak. Committee members who are here in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any changes, Chris?
There are no changes to the agenda. It's been a month.
Right. Thank you. All right, then we will deem the agenda approved as posted. We are now on agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from February 22nd, 2003 on page 9 of your packets. Does any member of the committee wish to make any changes? Okay, all right. In that case, we will, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 3, which is a recommendation to approve the February financials. Information on this item can be found on page 113 of your packet, Chris.
For the record, Chris Schuyler, Finance Director for the agency. I have the first chart here. Before we get into the actual numbers, I'd like to go through a couple of special topics that do impact the financials or potentially impact the financials. The first is the banking crisis that's been happening in the last few weeks. And the second is the impact of the weather that's had on the building. It has some additional expenses on the building stuff for there. In terms of the banking system, this would intersect with us in 2 areas. One is we have a substantial amount of investments. These are the mitigation funds and securities that are invested mostly in government plans like LAIF, but some at a principal group investment thing. So I've looked at that. None of the banks, the 4 banks that are really targeted right now are mostly of interest right now. We don't have any of those securities. All of ours, we do have about 1.2 million worth of notes from banks. Interestingly, a little over half of those are from Canadian banks. None of them are impacted. So I took a look last week. There haven't been any rating changes. There hasn't been any movement on the market value of our bonds. So in the investment portfolio, I think we're fine at this point. There's also the issue just of commercial banking. Our commercial banking accounts are with Wells Fargo. We now, everybody knows that there's a cap of $250,000 on insured deposits. We can't really effectively get below that because what we do is each week we'll either do payroll or AP and it flips back and forth. And both of those are well in excess of $250,000. Our payroll's a little over $300,000 and AP, it's usually around $400,000 or $500,000. And if we have a big mitigation fund release or something like that, it can easily spike from there. So we can't get below the 250. Janet Yellen's made some noises about basically guaranteeing all deposits. I don't know about that. But what we could do is we could maybe tighten up on how much money we keep in the Wells account. That would require us to do far more transfers back and forth between LAIF and Wells because we use LAIF for working capital. So a bit more some administrative costs and stuff like that. It would also cost us a little bit with interest rates so low. We've been leaving more money in the Wells Fargo account because we can't make interest in that account because it's a commercial account, but we can get an offset against fees if we keep a larger balance in that account. So I've been keeping a large balance there to kind of eliminate the banking fees. If we cut that balance down and keep it down to a minimum, less than $1 million, we would lose that and we wind up incurring more fees. That'd be offset by interest income that we would get from the LAIF. So I'm not saying that's a real reason to do that. But that is an impact there. Interestingly, LAIF both sent out a communication saying, we're fine. We're not able to have any exposure to Silicon Valley Bank or to Signature Bank or to any of the others. And I was looking at their investment portfolio itself, and their investment portfolio is actually very much like ours. They have like 5% in commercial notes altogether. Almost everything's in treasuries or short-term things like repos, stuff like that. CDs, some CDs. So I think we're fine on the banking issues. We will have a treasurer's report next month if we want to talk about it more there. Or if somebody wants to, additional direction on how to handle the accounts.
So Chris, obviously in connection with First Republic, we had a lot of the major banks, Bank of America and Wells Fargo, to name two, that basically infused capital into First Republic, which of course reduces their available cash. What is your assessment of how that may increase our exposure?
Well, I would say actually that it's a positive sign for Wells Fargo that they felt that they were strong enough that they could throw $5 billion into the pot along with the others to do that. I should say I also reached out to Bruce, our investment advisor for the principal group, because he used to be with Wells Fargo, but I really asked them, is the principal group changing their guidance on banks at this time? And he said, no, they're not changing their guidance on banks. And his opinion on Wells Fargo was they're fine, but again, he spent his entire career there until his department got sold off to principal group 2 years ago. So you want to probably take that with a grain of salt. I think we're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
But we can certainly monitor it. I would say we've been looking at coming up with a new agency credit card program because our current credit card program through Wells just doesn't do us any good. So we've been talking and we're kind of settled in on a program through Chase. And they very much want our business. So I expect JP Morgan Chase is going to be pressing to see if they can't steal our accounts away from Wells. And that may be something we look at down the road.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, more to come.
Okay, next chart,
Okay.
please. I got a couple of charts here. We've had a couple of incidents. One is we had a drain down on the second level in front of, we have a big roll-up door leading to a public area down there. And there was a drain there that got covered in snow and ice. And so it flooded into that area. Most of it is just kind of warehouse space. So it doesn't matter that much. We do have a file room down there. That got flooded a little bit. And so we had a few boxes of files that had water getting to the bottom of the files. And so the soap and files themselves may be soaked. We've done what we can with the space. We brought in some remediation people. That file room generally holds the oldest stuff that we don't access on a frequent basis. But we're gonna have to sort through that to see what, if anything, has been lost. But we're not expecting a big problem there. We did also have.
Excuse me, Chris, none of those files have been digitized.
No, well, there's a couple boxes in there that say they're ready for destruction because they've been digitized, but for the bulk part, they have not. And they're not high priority items to be digitized either. So that's me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I put this on mute, but this doesn't. So
I hear a ringing in my ears.
yes, somebody's trying to call. There was the water also did infiltrate into some of our tenant spaces, Sierra Valley Electric and the GSA space, both had carpet damage. So we brought in a remediation company. So they did all the things. They pulled back the carpet, they put up fans, dehumidifiers and all that stuff. Some of our other storage areas got flooded a little bit, no big deal. A bigger problem arose on TTD space where they had a leak coming in from the roof above. So we're having that dealt with by the same people again.
That's what buckets are for.
Hmm?
That's what buckets are for.
Yes. Not enough buckets to cover that leak, but we've dealt with it. So there's some damage. This overall is not going to cost us a lot of money, maybe $10,000 for remediation, but I do have the GSA guy yelling at me every day or two saying, you gotta do something, you gotta do something. So if I could have the next chart, please. The other thing is the roof. And for those of you who are following Tahoe, you know that there have been a lot of roof damages. At one point, 3 out of the 4 grocery stores were closed because of roof issues. All but one's reopened, really over here. And there've been a number of buildings red tagged, and there's a lot of individual houses that have been suffering from roof damage. We had a gas leak to our HVAC lines, so we had to go up on the roof to take out the gas lines to find the leak and fix it. So we just told the guys, go ahead and let's clean up the roof. And these are the actual roofers because they know the layout of the roof. They know where the solar panels are and all the HVAC units. So they've been up there digging away. So this photo here was taken last Thursday around noon. We think they're about 3/4 of the way down, done with the roof. It's really the north end that they're still digging out at this point. So that's taken a lot of weight off from the roof and kept us from, hopefully it will keep us from having any problems with that. We did replace the cover on the roof last year, but it's the actual structure itself that you worry about, especially now that the snow is consolidated and we've had rain on top of it. So that's a really dense snowpack up there. So these photos kind of indicate that. This is going to be really expensive, and everybody in town is looking at that at a huge expense to shovel their roofs and stuff like that. So I'm expecting this one will be perhaps over $100,000. The unanticipated expense just to
You're shoveling, does that include the remedial work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
They've been hacking away at this for like 3 weeks now. There's
Well,
a lot of snow up there.
And the problem with TPO membranes is that, I mean, they're easily damaged by, an improperly placed shovel. So,
They are definitely using plastic shovels
yeah.
and they're actually using wheelbarrows to move the snow around. Try to minimize damage.
Wow. Okay.
It's a truly impressive amount of snow. If you go over on this side of the building, they've been dumping up there the whole time. So we're addressing the roof issues. It's been, like I said, frightfully expensive, but at the same time, that's the structure of that roof is 45 years old. So definitely want to make sure that it's not compromised. We've certainly seen a lot of issues with other parts of the place.
Of course. Of course. Okay. All right. Well, you're doing everything possible to mitigate the damage. So,
I didn't like the cost. But then when the roof started caving in other parts of the city, I said, okay, we'll incur the costs just to avoid that. The Rayleighs over here at State Line actually did have a section of the roof fail,
Yeah.
drop down
wow. Wow.
into the right at the entrance that I usually go in at.
Where's global warming when you need it? Okay. All right.
So that's it for facility stuff. I have the next chart, please. Alexis had arranged a meeting with us with Ben Keycoffer, the governor's secretary, chief of staff, on the budget issues. So we did sit down with him. They've acknowledged that there was a mistake made. The money will get in there. It's still dependent on legislative action. The legislature still has to approve the budget.
This is for TTD.
This is for us. Well, it
Okay.
includes the, you have to be careful. There's 2 pieces of the TTD ask in Nevada. There's a small piece that we put in for TTD that covers the cost of running TTD, just the headquarters office. The bigger piece, the 777 stuff, is in bonds, and that's going through a different route, but they are running the bonds through. So the bonds are going to get into the system. They're going to be addressed. So both pieces will be considered by the legislature, but it'll be in 2 separate conversations, as it were. So the bonds are proceeding. I don't know, Julie, if you have more current data on that. But
So was it a mistaken translation with respect to our budget requests?
not clear, not entirely clear,
Okay.
because what was put in does not correlate to any of the things we asked for.
Okay. Okay.
It's not like they picked one thing and put that in, didn't put something else in, it was just a number.
Okay.
But that'll get fixed. We did have, I think I reported last month, we had a preliminary work meeting with the committees, the joint subcommittees.
Mhm.
Everything was fine. I also call out Haley because Haley and Alexis both sat in with the governor's office with us. So still more to come on that. And no updates on the California budget. Obviously, they're still plowing through their issues. Now we can get into the actual financials. I'm not going to talk a lot about this chart because I think everything I want to say is covered on the next chart. But this kind of shows where we are. There's a small negatives in fees and grants. In grants, it's because of the lag in billing. In fees, it's because we still don't fully recover our current planning costs. But if we go to the next chart, on budget stuff, the fees are okay. January, February are down a little bit. Some of that's bound to be weather related because it's just been so miserable up here for the last 2 months. But they are down a little bit. What that has really done is it's given Wendy and Tiffany's team a chance to catch up on their other planning activities. So they're doing very well on their 3120 now. Hopefully they'll talk more about that later. And we're still above the last 3-year average by about 4 or 5%. So that's good. On the expense side, we're all tracking to budget. Pretty much where we would expect to be at this point in time. And if I could have the next chart. I did 2 cash flow graphs this month. The one on the left is the traditional one that shows total cash flow. The one on the right compares before and after mitigation funds. And on that one, you can see how during the course of the year, mostly the cash flow with mitigation is higher because we're collecting those mitigation fees along with planning fees. And then you see an inflection point there, which is when the big transfer to India itself happened. So I'll clean these up and start to and try to get them a little more consistent and readable, but we'll carry this forward. And next month, we'll be doing the end of the quarter, so I'll do an update on mitigation fees at that time as well.
Okay.
We still have not heard back from CDC in terms of current status of Motel 6 project, but we're still working. Sure, no problem. We'll also do some history on it once I sort out the data sources. That's the end of my presentation on financials, unless somebody has a question and wants some data information.
Okay, all right. Any member of the committee have any questions regarding Chris's presentation?
I know I should know this, but just to refresh, what is our fiscal year?
It's the standard July 1st to June 30th. So we're 2/3 of the way through at this point. So your figure merit is 67%.
Okay, any other questions by members of the committee? All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. We'll now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Maria, are you tracking?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have one hand raised.
Okay,
Pamela Sigdinos, if you'd like to go ahead and address the committee.
good morning,
Yes.
Pam.
Good morning. I have a question regarding the records that are currently potentially damaged underwater. Is there an attempt to restore rather than just completely destroy? I know it's really important to get those digital records online. I would really encourage your team to do so and would like to understand what the plan might be.
Yeah, what was done immediately was just to get them out of the water and get them up and have them start to dry off. We're going to go through all the boxes to examine what's in those boxes to see if they are, to be honest, even to see if there are records we need to retain. Because I know some of them, probably 10% of them were for TIMS, which is a long dead program that's been replaced by LT Info. We probably don't need those records at all, but we will do an evaluation of each record. And the plan is to scan all the records that we need at some point. But we'll certainly take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Pamela. Okay, any other members joining us remotely with a question?
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, I see a couple of people in the audience, and assuming no one wishes to address the committee at this point on this item. Okay, all right, then we will go ahead and close public comment. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? If not, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the governing board to approve the February financials.
So moved.
Thank you. Yes, all right. There. Okay, keep moving. Yes, I know you're anxious to get to our pick. Maria, could you please call a roll?
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Lane,
Aye.
Ms. Aldine.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Maria. Let's move on to the next item, which is item number 4, which is a recommendation to approve the environmental zone SCZ mitigation funds in the amount of $110,000 for the Meyer Stream Environment Zone / Erosion Control Project. Information on this item can be found on page 133 of your packet. Tracy.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Tracy Campbell with the EIP department here at TRPA with a mitigation request from El Dorado County in the amount of $110,000 SEZ funds. And that's for the Meyer Stream Environment Zone and Erosion Control Project. First phase of this project was completed back in 2017. So this request is actually for phase 2, which was developed when the county secured some additional funding through Lake Tahoe Restoration Act and Prop 1. Project area runs along East San Bernardino Avenue from Bakersfield Street to San Diego Street, where the watershed catchment will be disconnected from the existing uncontrolled drainage and then rerouted to a wetland treatment system. This work will help reduce water quality impacts from the Myers residential area, and some of the other benefits include ecosystem restoration and flood control. Project scheduled for construction this summer, 2023, and we are joined online by senior engineer from El Dorado County, Donaldo Palarone, who can answer any questions you might have about the project. And so with that, I will pass it back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pretty straightforward. Does this request zero out the account? Tracy, it does not. Okay, all right. Okay, any questions regarding this item from members of the committee? Seeing none? I see no hand.
I have a-
Gabriel, yes. Okay, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I have a quick question. So my understanding is that these are funds for implementation and unforeseen construction costs. Is that correct?
It's part of a package of funding, so I'm going to ask Donaldo if he would like to be a little more specific. But yes, that is part of it for sure.
Good morning, committee. Donaldo Palarone with El Dorado County. Yes, to answer your question, it is going towards the implementation. We've already secured, as Tracy had mentioned, Prop 1 and Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. This is just to supplement any unforeseen circumstances during implementation of the project.
And I might add that any unused money will be returned to the SEZ fund at the conclusion of the project. Any funds that come from this act will be returned if they're unused.
Got it.
Okay.
That was my only question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any further questions from members of the committee? Okay, in that case, we will go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Maria, first of all, any members of the audience wishing to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll go to our virtual participants. Maria, anyone wishing to comment? virtually?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, great. Then we'll close public comment. If there are no further questions by the committee, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the governing board to approve the release subject to the conditions contained in this memorandum.
So moved.
Thank you, Brooke. We have a motion. Any comments on the question? All right, Maria, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Aldine.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. All right, that brings us to agenda item number 5, which is a recommendation regarding the proposed amendments to the rules of procedure, section 2.16, teleconference / video conference. Information on this item can be found on page 147 of your packet, although there was a last minute change to the verbiage that was contained in your packet. So with that, John, thank you for joining us. John Marshall, this morning's meeting.
Thank you very much. This is a package of amendments to Rule of Procedure 2.16, which is our internal rule for teleconferencing and the ability of governing board members and also by kind of default APC members to participate remotely. Over the years, we've made amendments to this rule to make it more flexible to allow participation remotely by governing board members. During the last several years, of course, we've been under the emergency orders of the two states, and we were able to conduct purely hybrid without too many limitations imposed by traditional state laws and our own rule of conferencing. So coming out of that, we are now in an era where we're back into application of our own teleconferencing rule, which had some limitations. And also there's been, in the meantime, some substantial revision to the teleconferencing policies of both for local governments in California, the Brown Act, and the open meeting law in Nevada. Last month, we had a kind of working session with legal committee to talk about upcoming changes and potentially where we might want to propose some additional flexibility, essentially for two reasons. One, because I think people are more comfortable with the concept of teleconferencing as a result of the amount of teleconferencing that's happened over the last couple of years. And also just as indicated by today's weather, we have substantial public safety concerns in terms of folks moving into the basin during periods of storm, and where we don't want to put people at risk. If in fact there are issues like that, and at the same time conduct our business. So the changes that are being proposed coming out of the legal committee and then as worked on by staff are in at page 156 and 157, and you'll see as modified by the handout for just paragraph 2.16.3. So I'm going to go kind of at a broad level first, and then we can talk about specific language and particularly about the handout that's also posted online if you need to pull it up if you're either remote or a member of the public. So really the first thing that we're doing is affirming that members can appear remotely. And there's two sub questions that we need to talk through, and I'll give you my proposal. But one of them is whether or not you need to be within, when you're appearing remotely, whether or not you need to be within the jurisdiction you represent. So most, and particularly, there's some, should there be some connection with where you are located and what jurisdiction you're representing? So that's one question that we want to talk about, that we may want to back off what's in the proposal and go with what's in the handout, which would be essentially saying it doesn't make a whole lot of difference once you're remote where you are. The second question that this involves is the quorum. Where should the quorum be located? Currently, our rule says a quorum of members to conduct business, which for TRPA is 4 from Nevada and 4 from California, so majority in each state, needs to be present within the basin. So they can be remote, but they have to be within the basin. And so the proposal is to take that quorum requirement out. The Brown Act has a more stringent quorum requirement, which is that you have to be present. A quorum has to be present. And the Nevada open meeting law has a substantially more relaxed quorum requirement. There is no quorum in essence. So we can talk a little bit about whether or not we want to move off of a jurisdictional requirement for quorum, or do we just want to again say that we should, wherever people are, excuse me, my phone is going off.
burning up the lines.
um, that, anyway, so let's go through the second bullet is kind of, this is a, in our old rule or the current rule, we had to notice where people were peering remotely and make that open to the public and essentially have an agenda posted. So it was like it was a remote office for TRPA and people could appear there if they wanted to. I think everyone's comfortable now with moving away from that and essentially saying, if you provide the members of the public with an opportunity to appear remotely, then the individual locations where governing board members are located need not be open. So where the proposal is to make, if the member wants to, they can make, post and have it open, but essentially say there's no requirement that location be open to the public, since the public, and that you'll see on the next slide, but not moving there yet. We have guarantees of where the public can participate in 3 different manners, either via a two-way connection using telephone, internet connection, or in person. So with that, the general approach is to allow members to appear remotely without being subject to having their residence be open to the public or wherever they might be. Can we go back one slide, please? Thank you. What's new is something that's coming out of California that we can debate and whether we want to do, is to really to emphasize that the first option is to be here in person, and the second option, backup option, is for remote appearances. And so there's a limitation on the number of remote appearances. Working with the chair, we figured maybe a proposal is to 5 per year, given the accounting some winter months, and then 3 in a row, which comes out of the California amendments to the Brown Act. So those are intended to really say this is a backup mechanism, not the primary directive for board members to appear in public, and not to make this standard practice. Another key thing that comes out of the Brown Act is the required disclosure of adults in remote locations. So if there's anyone over 18 present in the room with appearing remotely, you need to disclose that to the public. So people know if, for whatever reason, you might have a member of the public that has a particular interest one way or another in the item, that can be disclosed. Can we now go to the next screen, please? And we talked about the 3 modes of participation for the public. That's writing that that's what we do now. So that's just writing that into the rule to make sure that the public has those opportunities out in the future. We would delete the in-basin quorum requirements. And the other thing that we talked about relaxing a bit is the rule that we have now that requires all votes to be roll call votes. So votes for approving the agenda, or votes for adjourning have to be by roll call. And to promote a little more efficiency in our meetings, we would say essentially allow voice votes for administrative matters. Now, we define that a little bit technically in the actual code language or the rule language. It's votes that are not specified by a rule, a prior rule in chapter 2. And so that essentially means all, it's administrative procedural matters. But if there's a vote specified in the rules for an agenda item, and those are listed in chapter 2, then that would have to be a roll call vote. Okay. And then I just wanted to quickly touch on the handout, which is going 2.16.3, which essentially removes the quorum requirement for members in the basin, and also removes the requirement that you must appear remotely within your jurisdiction. So for example, if a member has a meeting that takes them out of state of they represent or out of the jurisdiction they represent, they can still participate remotely since again, the meeting space, remote space is closed to the public. It doesn't really matter where it is for the most part. So we wanted to talk those changes through. And with that, I will take your questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions or comments on members of the committee? Vince?
Yeah, thank you, John, for doing that. And yeah, I appreciate as a member of California who has frequently conflicting meetings in far-flung places for another board to be able to participate from anywhere. What I was wondering is, do we need, you mentioned the Brown Act has requirements. Do we need to comply with those? Because the 3 meetings consecutively, I still worry about it a little bit, just given weather, because, you know, I got up at 3:30 this morning through, you know, drove through torrential rain. And even though the weather up here wasn't that bad, it was still a little terrifying coming over that pass, slipping around in traffic. You know, if the weather had been worse, you know, it really is pretty risky. So I was just wondering if we could remove that and just have the 5 you know, the 5 in a year, which would give us more flexibility. I mean, my intention is to be here every meeting, but yeah, that, I mean, if the weather had been a little bit worse, it would have been, you know, it would have been hard for me to justify near-death experience for it. So
Yes,
I'm
just
curious if that's an option.
it is. So just to quickly recap, this is in staff report. Article 3D of the compact incorporates either the Brown Act or the Nevada open meeting laws, whichever is stricter, for which meeting shall be open to the public. It doesn't incorporate the entire panoply of the rules. It expressly references only those provisions that control whether or not the meeting is open to the public. So the meetings will always be open to the public when we have a meeting as controlled by the Nevada open meeting law, which is more strict on that front than the Brown Act. Generally, we look to both statutes to kind of control how we interact with the public and how, you know, agendas should be set and noticing. We have our own rules for that, but the more we deviate from California and Nevada, I think, you know, we're a bi-state agency of those 2 states, and so we should generally fall within those guidelines for our administrative practice. So we like to keep as close as possible, but at the same time, we're a different agency than most state governments, which are controlled by the Brown, local governments, which are controlled by the Brown Acts that have discrete, smaller representations on their city councils and county councils, that essentially those members come from those counties or cities, as opposed to, you know, our far-flung statewide representation. So I'm comfortable with if that's the will of the committee to make that recommendation.
John, I thought there was a contract provision or provision in one of the other 2 controlling documents that indicates that if a board member misses 3 consecutive meetings, that they are subject to replacement. Removal.
Yes.
Is that the origin of this?
No.
Of this amendment?
No, that's if you miss a meeting as opposed to participating remotely.
But miss a meeting within the context of when the document was drafted would be not appearing at the meeting, correct? I think there's flexibility in that language that I would not, my first instinct would not to say you need to appear in person, even though that's at the time in either 69 or 1980, when those provisions were brought in, that teleconferencing was probably not conceived of, that technology, or at least it wasn't
maybe by patching in by phone or something. But I don't think it doesn't say in person, it just attend the meeting. So I would interpret that to say that if you're appearing remotely, you wouldn't be subject to the 3 in a row of the compact. So we can decide, where this came from is the Brown Act that has that limitation in it.
So I guess we have the option of either adopting the language as presented and seeing whether or not people are able to comply with it. If people are not able to comply with it and we have to cancel meetings as a result of the lack of a quorum, then we can revisit the issue, or we can defer to our out of basin members and proceed by eliminating the 3 consecutive months in a row requirement and see if we get any pushback. So, and I'm comfortable doing that. John, if you're comfortable with it, you don't think it violates the spirit of
No.
any of the documents we have to comply with, and I'm comfortable with that amendment.
Again, that would be a recommendation to the governing board that
Right.
we would
Exactly.
aggregate and then
Right.
bring it on consent later today.
And maybe we could do it almost the opposite, where it's opened up, and if people are abusing it and really missing
Then we can revisit.
a lot, we
the
could
rules.
revisit and clamp down.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me just clarify, you still want the 5, but not the 3.
Correct.
5 per
Correct.
year,
Maximum, right.
max, and no consecutive limitation, understanding that the compact imposes, as the chair indicated, a requirement that if you miss more than 3, a miss as in not attend at all in any capacity, then you're subject to replacement.
And we're adopting our legal counsel's interpretation of that requirement. Okay, all right. Okay, so any comments by members of the committee regarding the proposed amendment and the recommendation we make to the governing board?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would just chime in and just say, as a person also that has to travel to meetings weekly, how important it is to be in person. I think that's one thing we've all learned. The convenience of Zoom is great, but all of us that have participated in that way, we're, doing dishes or reading another document, and not fully engaged. So I think we also want to strongly recommend to people that they attend meetings in person and only use Zoom on those few times that they have to.
Require that they be on camera continuously throughout the meeting.
There you go.
Um,
And that.
So that is something we could put in, that
Mhm.
you have to appear by video. I know that there are technologically times when that is not possible. So the Brown Act, for example, requires that you appear both by video and audio. That was never part of the rule. So we did not incorporate that. Just to make clear that there is no requirement. We can, the chair can say, as we usually do, we have bandwidth, we want you to appear visually, but that right now, that's not required in the rule.
Well, what is the pleasure of the committee? You want to make that a requirement to compensate for the removal of the 3 consecutive meetings?
Can we ask people already to appear? I mean, without,
We do, but there are times when the video goes dark.
okay,
So. And, if they have to leave for personal reasons, you can still leave your camera on. If you have to leave the room for a bathroom break, for
Bathroom break or-
example. But
eating lunch.
I think it probably would, instill in people a greater sense of responsibility to be present.
Yeah.
And engaged in the committee meetings or in the board meetings. So what's the pleasure of the committee? Brooke?
I agree. I
Sure.
think that should be a requirement.
So what that means is if a member has difficulty with their video, and remember, it's sometimes the video is what really sucks the bandwidth. And so shifting to audio allows a weaker signal to, you can still, participate. If we adopt that proposal, then they are no longer able to participate in the meeting. If you say you have to have video, that if for some reason technologically it's not working, then they can't participate.
Then we could lose our quorum and we'd have to adjourn the meeting.
So maybe we continue it the way we have, which is where the chair asks that you show your video, but we not make it a requirement in those cases where there are technology issues. But hopefully, again, we would notice if that was being abused.
Well, I mean, we're all adults on this board on occasion. I have confidence that everybody serving on this board is committed to their responsibilities as governing board members. So I'm really not terribly concerned. And it, as you say, if there's abuse, then we can revisit the rule and maybe strengthen it. Okay. Are you satisfied with that, Lex? Okay. All right. Yes, Prince.
I had one more question about the noticing who's in a room. Does that open us up to people questioning whether the vote was legitimate in the future? Like, what if, someone could find out that someone had come into the room during a period or something and it wasn't noticed, or, it kind of seems like, how do you prove who was there? I don't know if that's an issue like that we'd have to worry about. I mean, that was one thing that occurred to me with the location requirement, was then all of a sudden we might have to be proving where we were to people. Otherwise they could say, that vote was not right. So I was curious if that could be a problem.
It's always conceptually
A problem,
possible. I think if you are diligent in acting in good faith to disclose, then that's a very good defense to any subsequent challenge that you may have missed somebody who was happened to be tangentially walking across a room or something like that. I think it is a key element for ensuring the public faith in the workings of government, to make certain that if you are appearing remotely, because if you're in person, then we can see, everyone can see. And when you're appearing remotely, there is a degree of kind of what's going on. And if you're acting in good faith and you make those disclosures and you do the best job you can, then I don't think it's going to result in a successful effort at undermining the vote.
Well, and frankly, from a practical standpoint, even if there is somebody in the room, I don't know how they could really engage in a meaningful conversation with a person who's participating in the meeting without that being heard or seen, if they're concerned about undue influence. So, but I understand the importance of staying within the sidebars of the documents that govern these remote conferencing meetings. All right. Any other questions or concerns by members of the committee?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Gabriel, please.
So my question is how this would work in regards to where occasionally I have to step in on the secretary's behalf. So I am attending this meeting virtually because logistically I wasn't able to make it up. However, the secretary will be in person at the governing board meeting later today. So if I am not able to attend in person, does that count as one of the secretary's 5? Does the math change because he'll be in person at a later meeting? Those are just a couple questions that occurred right away.
Interesting question.
Interesting question. Thank you very much. One that hopefully I didn't have to answer, but in that case, I probably would advocate that we would not count that circumstance, because essentially this is a committee meeting as opposed to a board meeting. We are, we've essentially maintained the rule that committee meetings are a little different when they're, so I quite honestly, I think, people come in and participate when they, if they have a conflict, for example, in the morning, they'll come in the afternoon. I would not count that as a meeting that was missed for the compact purposes. So I don't think we would count that as one of the 5 for this purpose. I think.
Okay, thank you. My only other thought is regarding some of the, I don't know, but again, understanding that California has a stricter rule than Nevada does. And also, frankly, there are just quite a few committee and board meetings in Nevada that are now predominantly still conducted remotely. So I don't want any of you to think that my presence remotely is in any way a slight on the board or the organization. I'm just very used to attending a number of meetings in front of my computer. But the other question is, would it be possible to institute some sort of exemption that could be requested? So maybe to have some of those stricter rules in place, but put the broader board in the position of providing an exemption if a member has a specific circumstance.
That is possible if that's the direction of the committee to make that recommendation. We could add something that the 5 could be subject to extension. There are under the Brown Act amendments, there is a good cause requirement and an emergency requirement, and those are run through either the whole body to approve or through the chair. And so, there is a model for that. If you all feel that the 5 is too strict, and there may be instances in which you need an exception.
I just know, speaking for myself, and I believe for the secretary, I would always rather attend a meeting remotely than miss a meeting, right? If the options were to, I would just always rather be able to participate, even if circumstances don't line up to attend in person, than miss the meeting entirely.
Just to clarify my answer, there is no, within the Brown Act, there's no exception to the 5 and the 3. It's just that in order to even qualify for the 5 or the 3, for a remote appearance, you have to run that through either the body or the chair to get permission to do that. So we could use that language to provide another exception to the 5 if the committee wants to recommend that.
Okay, Gabriel, thank you for those comments. Any comments by members of the committee about inserting providing for some sort of approved exemption?
Madam Chair, my only thought on that would be that in light of the fact that I was just advocating for people really making an attempt to be here in person, that we just try it and see how it goes. And if we have to amend it, come back. But I don't want to make too many opportunities to extend that. I mean, we have 12 meetings a year. They're notified way ahead of time. We know what the schedule is today. I think 5 is generous, and we just need to see how it goes. And if things come up, like Gabriel has pointed out, where Secretary of State is going to be here later today, but couldn't be at the committee meeting, we're already making leeway for that. I think we try it.
I would agree with that. I think too much leniency can be a problem as well. Any other comments by members of the committee? And I'm assuming, John, even though it's not explicitly stated, obviously this requirement regarding attending a total of 5 times in person per year will apply to either governing board appointees or their designated alternates, correct? We don't have to specify that.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. That was an interesting conversation with a few wrinkles that I wasn't anticipating. Okay. No, listen, that's okay. That's all right. If there are no further comments by members of the committee, we'll now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called upon and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any members of the public wishing to comment on this item? All right, seeing none. Maria, anyone online interested in commenting?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we will close public comment. And if there are no further comments by members of the committee, I will entertain a motion to recommend the governing board approve the required findings, including a finding of no significant effect for the adoption of the amendments to the rule 2.16 of the rules of procedure as amended and discussed at this committee meeting. And just to review the amendment to the modified language appearing as section 2.16.3. During a teleconference, members may attend remotely from any location. No member may appear remotely more than a total of 5 times per calendar year. This numerical limitation shall not apply to committee meetings not held on the same day as the governing board meeting. Is there a motion to forward that recommendation onto the governing board?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Any comments on the question?
Just clarification. You left out, no member may appear remotely for governing board meetings. Did you mean to leave that part out?
May appear remotely. You're right. No, that is a correction. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. I was a little overly zealous with my strikeouts. Okay, so let's repeat that for purposes of this motion. During a teleconference, members may attend remotely from any location. No member may appear remotely for governing board meetings more than a total of 5 times per calendar year. These numerical limitations shall not apply to committee meetings not held on the same day as a governing board meeting. Will the maker of the motion accept the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, we have a modified amendment. All right, so no further questions. Thank you for bringing that up, Brooke. Mario, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Lane,
Aye.
Ms. Dis, Mr. Honigman,
Aye.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Aldine.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. All right. That brings us to item number 7, shoreline implementation update. Information on this item can be found. Thank you, John.
I'm
yes.
sorry, do we need to, did you do both motions or just the first motion? You have,
You know, I'm working off my cheat sheet and it only had contained 1 motion. So 2
the
motions.
packet has 2 motions. You just made the findings and then there's a second motion to recommend adoption.
See, these cheat sheets make me lazy.
Ah,
In this case, I really cheated.
I'm sorry, we should have had
Okay.
it's up on the screen.
Okay, all right. Will the maker of the original motion please make the second motion?
Yes. So moved.
Okay, so that was a motion to adopt resolution 2023 blank to amend rule 2.16 of the rules of procedure as amended.
And that would just to clarify, a motion to
Yes.
recommend adoption.
Yes, a motion to recommend adoption. All right. Let's just go ahead and make that motion again. So the motion is to recommend adoption of resolution 2023 blank to amend rule 2.16 of the rules of procedure as amended on the record. Okay. All right.
So moved.
All right. Any comments on the question? Seeing none, Mario, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Mr. Honigman,
Aye.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Lane,
Aye.
Ms. Aldine.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Okay, we struggled through that one. All right. Now on to shoreline implementation update. This can be found on page 369 of your packet, and Tiffany is joining us to lead us through this discussion. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and committee members. My name is Tiffany Good. I am the permitting program manager in the Permitting and Compliance Department. And at the request of committee members earlier this year, I'm here today to give you an update on implementation of our shoreline plan. The good news today is that there are no motions associated with this
Thank
agenda
goodness.
item, so
Right.
we don't have to worry about that. Next slide, please. All right, I know we have a lot of new board members, and I want to help make this update clear. So I'm going to present a very short, brief background on the shoreline plan, and then highlight some of our implementation milestones and accomplishments, as well as what staff is currently working on. And I just want to point out right up front that as with the adoption of any major planning initiative, it takes a lot of time and resources to figure out how to put a set of complex policies into motion in a way that's effective, transparent, measurable, consistent, and digestible to the public. And I'm really proud of how hard our staff has worked to accomplish these objectives. And we're continuing that work even as really unique challenges continue to arise. Next slide, please. So very briefly, I would like to highlight some of the objectives of the shoreline plan. As you know, getting this plan across the finish line was quite the effort. It took decades and endless hours of stakeholder collaboration. The plan really focuses on balancing the built environment with new structures and uses and recreation access in the shore zone. And the shoreline plan really allows development and redevelopment in the shore zone in a way that hadn't been done in a very long time. And we opened our doors to new shore zone permitting opportunities for the public, while also emphasizing the absolute importance of natural resource management along the shoreline. And the major tenets of the shoreline plan that relate to our permitting discussion today are really these first three bullets. The shoreline plan capped development, new development, especially in the shore zone. It also established guidelines for appropriate uses and gave us updated regulations for things like piers and buoys, boat ramps, and marinas. Next slide, please. So when we talk about shore zone, we have a pretty specific lingo that we use. And I just want to kind of go over this language that we use because it's going to help inform our discussion of accomplishments that, as we go along. So really, again, the addition of new piers and moorings is capped on Lake Tahoe, and that's a very important thing to remember. And because these caps are for new structures, it's important for us to differentiate between new and existing. And so that's kind of this first differentiation is new versus existing. And new structures are those that are permitted and put into place after the adoption of the plan. And existing structures are those that have the benefit of a previous TRPA, state or federal authorization or were in place prior to 1972. So as we go through this, it's just important to keep those distinctions between new and existing at the front of mind. So the mooring program, we have two big programs that we're going to be talking about today. One is the mooring program, the other is the new pier program. And the mooring program really has two major pieces to it. We have the phase 1 and phase 2 moorings. So this, as I talk about where we're at with permitting, you'll hear me reference phase 1 and phase 2. And these terms are used to differentiate between existing and new. So right after adoption of the plan, we focused on addressing existing or phase 1 moorings first. And the phase 2 moorings are in reference to new moorings. So again, phase 1 is existing, phase 2 is new. The program also differentiates between mooring registration and mooring permitting. So a TRPA permit, when we talk about permitting, is the mechanism required to place a mooring or a structure. And the registration is simply the fee to mitigate the annual boating impacts created by that structure. So again, the difference between new and existing, phase 1 and phase 2, permitting and registration. Next slide, please. So these next few slides correspond to the tables that were in your packet, highlighting staff accomplishments and tackling both phase 1 and phase 2 moorings, as well as new pier permit applications. So again, one of our first orders of business after adoption of the plan was to recognize the existing moorings on the lake. And these, again, are moorings that had already received appropriate authorization, and they simply had to register these moorings. So this pie chart that you see up on this screen is in reference to those phase one registrations. Again, they just had to register these with TRPA. And this phase one registration bucket, it was actually a pretty big bucket for us to contend with. But it was really important for us to tackle these first prior to addressing any new moorings on the lake to ensure that we keep within the parameters outlined in both the code and the environmental impact analysis. So to date, staff have processed 1,140 registrations, which account for about 5,400 existing moorings. And this is indicated by the large dark blue chunk in that pie chart. And I do want to point out that applications outside of that dark blue chunk of the pie chart are either still in review or are paused either due to the need for additional information, on hold at the request of the applicant, or have been denied. And so this kind of color scheme will carry through the next few slides in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this next slide indicates our accomplishments on phase one mooring registrations that require a permit. So again, all moorings require registration, but not all moorings required a permit in this phase one bucket, because some of those phase one moorings were already authorized and didn't need a permit. But those that those that did, we've actually done pretty well on. We've processed about 90% of those. Of the 1,140 phase one registrations, staff have issued about 200 permits that were required for that. And that's again indicated in the dark blue chunk of the pie. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is representative of the phase two permits. So we had kind of two pieces of phase one existing, and now these phase two permits are applications and permits for new moorings. Again, just a reminder that the total number of new moorings allocated through the life of the plan is capped. And in order to distribute those new moorings equitably, we do so on a slow as you go approach in consideration of private, public, and marina uses. So we have created a system, an annual lottery that facilitates this approach. And we have been implementing this over the past 2 years. So currently staff are making good progress on issuing permits for these new moorings, as indicated again by the dark blue section. And we have recently dedicated additional staff resources and redirected internal staff resources to these permits specifically. Next slide, please. All right, and lastly, I would like to highlight our new pier permitting accomplishments. Again, this is one of those categories, new piers that are capped. We can only have so many new piers over the life of the plan. TRPA also distributes these piers through a lottery system, and it's conducted in much the same manner as the mooring lottery system. We have actually implemented this system twice so far, once in 2019 and 2021. It happens every other year. So we're gearing up to bring forth a lottery for the 2023 allocations this summer. And again, we have made really good progress on these, especially considering that all of these new pier applications either need to be considered by the governing board or by hearings officers. So they all require some level of public hearing. Next slide, please. And as important as permitting is, I also would like to highlight what we've accomplished on the enforcement side of things, because again, that's a very important piece of shoreline implementation. First of all, I want to highlight our enforcement of the no wake zone. And we have really beefed up our presence on the lake with 2 patrol boats logging approximately 1,200 hours on the water and resulting in 620 enforcement actions. And what these enforcement actions do is really educate people on the no wake zone and on downloading the Lake Tahoe boating app and making hopefully what is a safer environment for folks out on the lake. And so that is something that is always a priority focus for us every season. On the mooring enforcement side, so far we have really focused mooring enforcement on illegal moorings that are placed offshore of public land, especially where it is clear that a permit cannot be issued for that mooring. The compliance team, the boat crew, as well, has tagged 47 illegal buoys, most of which have been removed. And our enforcement presence will continue to strengthen as we continue to make advances in our mooring permitting and registration program. Next slide, please. And I would be remiss if I didn't include the great work being done by our permitting, boat crew, compliance, AIS, research and analysis, and long-range planning staff and legal staff on working towards some of the very important and very time-consuming work on things like no wake zone enforcement, education and outreach with our stakeholders and partners, and response to the high demand for all types of shore zone permits. Next slide. We're just about there. So I know it has been asked, why is it so hard and why does it take so long to permit shore zone projects? There are probably a lot of reasons I could go into today, but I'll keep it simple. First of all, we haven't updated our shoreline ordinances for a very long time. So these are our new ordinances. And as a result of the past, more restrictive shore zone permitting environment, there's a lot of pent up demand to pursue all types of shoreline projects. And there have been relatively limited staff resources dedicated specifically to shoreline permitting. And also the shore zone is a very complex environment. It's very sensitive from an environmental perspective and also from a policy and property rights perspective. There are a lot of very strong vested interests across the board. And lastly, there are a plethora of state and federal agencies that have jurisdiction in the shore zone. And there's a high level of coordination that is required to occur amongst all of us. And that happens on every project, from placement of a buoy to dredging projects to marina projects. Next slide, please. The good news is that we have learned so much over the last 4 years since adoption of the plan, and we are constantly becoming more effective and efficient with implementation and permitting. As I mentioned before, we have added and redirected internal resources to the shoreline permitting team, and we are already seeing the benefits of doing so with an uptick in our output as far as issuing permits. And as Chris said earlier, it's also the weather has helped us give us a little bit of a reprieve from other permitting, pressures that we might face. And so we feel good that we're getting back on track to where we need to be. We have also added and clarified a lot of our shore zone ordinances that are in place so that we can implement them more efficiently. And this is an ongoing effort that you're going to continue to see more, potentially more ordinances that we're going to strive to clarify to make things more understandable and achievable both for internal staff and for our customers. And we are also focusing largely on internal process improvements. And that has been the benefit of where we are now, of learning over the past 4 years of what works and what doesn't, that we can hopefully make our internal processes better. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up and turn it back to you for questions or comments.
Okay. So I guess I have a couple of questions. Do you think there would be any benefit in the report we all received, the report that's typically provided to us each meeting, the Tahoe and Brief report, which includes the activity permitting activity in connection with shore zone. Would there be any benefit, do you think, when a permit is denied to maybe expound on why that permit was denied? Just so people who are thinking of making application understand what the requirements are and some of the reasons why their permit may be denied if the application is incomplete, if because they can't, for example, they don't have the evidence necessary to make a compelling case for grandfathering. I mean, I'm just wondering, I don't want to make a lot of extra work for staff, but you know, if people are accessing this information online, I mean, it might be useful to let them know why shore zone applications are denied.
Yeah, I think this is really relevant to put in our internal process improvements. A lot of our documents that we place online, like applications for folks, we're consistently updating and clarifying to capture, you know, to I guess communicate cases where project could be approved versus where a project couldn't be approved. And so we are striving to make more of those finer points that aren't necessarily blatant in the code, and communicate them in things like applications or information packets. And so any suggestions where we could make those things public facing are absolutely welcome, but that is something that we're working on with our internal process improvements as well.
Okay, great.
I
Great.
just wanted
Yes.
to add just a gloss on top of that is that we do issue denial letters.
Mhm.
And maybe the best thing to do is for those denials, just add a link to that specific document to say, you know, what I don't want to do is have to incorporate everything from the denial letter into the Tahoe in brief.
Can we redact the name of the applicant? For
It-
privacy
it's-
purposes? It's
it-
public information.
It's
I
public
know, but-
information. So I think just by providing a link in there that if you're interested in that denial, then you can
Okay,
click on the
well,
link and go to the letter and that explains.
yeah, no, John, I
the
think that's
denial.
great if there are no legal implications. That would be an easy way.
That'd be,
obviously.
it would make me more comfortable than trying to summarize all the grounds for the denial
Okay,
and then
Okay.
have to potentially argue, well, you excluded one, so that doesn't
Right.
count.
okay, all right, fair enough. Okay, all right. That makes less work for staff, and I'm sure it will. That's great. Couple of other questions. Are both of our patrol boats operable now? Do you know?
They're,
Chris
Yeah, but-
probably is better to
yeah.
answer this, yeah.
short answer is no, but they will be by the time. Morty says
Okay,
yes.
okay, all right. Because I know the league board is anxious to get back out on the water. We had to cancel our trip last year. Yeah, that's great. I don't have any further questions. Any members of the committee have any questions regarding Tiffany's presentation? No? Okay. All right. That was very, as I say, very comprehensive. Thank you for that.
Madam
That
Chair.
answers a lot of questions that we had. So if there are no comments by members of the committee, I'm sorry, Julie, yes. Julie.
Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Sure.
Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. I just wanted, as you close the item, I just really wanted to say how proud that we are of our team, of Tiffany for her leadership. There's an incredible team at TRPA, and as Tiffany mentioned, we've upsized that team to address some pretty difficult challenges. And when I had my one-on-one interviews with members of the shoreline permitting team, you know, the amount of care and thought that team is putting into this program is extraordinary, and the difficulty and the pressure has been extraordinary. And so I really want to compliment them to coming up with some solutions to move this forward. You know, anytime we implement a very large new policy initiative, the implementation can be very difficult and challenging, and you never can anticipate all the things that come up when you get down into the permitting process. So I'm really proud of the team for working through this, and there's a lot of work left to do, but the team has worked very hard. I just wanted to make that mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Well, there's nothing easy about shoreline. We know that from past experience. So yeah, thank you to you and your team. Actually, I did have one last question, just out of curiosity. John, maybe you can answer this. I understand that TRPA tags these illegal buoys, but is not responsible for removing them. Do we remove the anchors as well as the buoys? And are those buoys returned to their lawful owners, or are they considered abandoned because they're in many cases on public property?
We have a process that's outlined in MOUs with both states, I believe. And that kind of runs through, and I can't directly recall
Okay.
who's responsible for exactly doing what, but we, the state, both state lands entities have a lot more authority than we do on the surface to go out and remove a buoy. It, sometimes that includes the block. I think sometimes probably it might not. But I think the key thing is we're only removing them after we provided notice and a demand that the owner remove them.
Right.
Oftentimes, these are buoys that are offshore of state lands
Mhm.
or public lands, and so no one's going to claim that that's theirs because they're in violation. And so it de facto is abandoned.
Right, right. Okay, all right.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair, on rare occasion, we have taken an unclaimed buoy that we can't identify the owner of and had our staff put a seagull on it and give it a number and give it to an outgoing board member.
Yeah, like Barbara Sagaski.
Exactly.
Loves buoys, yes.
But that's very rare, but that's one in use. Of
Thank you. So we are putting them to good use. That's good to know. Okay. I like the idea of recycling. All right, with that, we're going to move on to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member of the public in the room wishing to comment on this item? Seeing no one rushing to the podium, Maria, anyone wishing to comment remotely?
Madam Chair, we have one.
Okay,
Gavin, please go ahead if you'd like to address the committee.
good morning, Gavin.
Good morning. Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, committee chair and members and TRPA staff. Gavin Feiger, on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. I think most of you know, but for the new board members, the league was one of the key members of the Shoreline Steering Committee and intricately involved with developing the plan. We've been closely tracking implementation and working with TRPA, jurisdictions, marinas, concessionaires. As Julie said, we really appreciate the focus on permitting, moorings, and piers over the last 4+ years, and staff really has done a fantastic job. There's been expected and unexpected complexities that they've handled perfectly. However, there are 4 main areas that have not been fully implemented. We've brought this up pretty regularly: no wake zones, boating safety and education, concession permitting and enforcement, and the AIS aquatic invasive species management plans. So with the no wake zones, an MOU with all the local law enforcement agencies was supposed to be signed and in place 6 months after the plan was adopted, so June 2019. Still hasn't been done. Steve Sweet isn't here today. We want to acknowledge that he's been working really hard on it. He's been building relationships with local law enforcement agencies. They've started tracking their on-water engagements, which we really appreciate. But the on-water coordination envisioned in the MOU still hasn't happened. So that's been a big focus of ours over the years. Boating safety, we put on a safety clinic last year along with TRPA for concessionaires. We can't do that every year, but would love to see somebody take that on. And the boating safety messaging put into the concessionaire permitting. So permitting is the third thing that we have not seen implemented as much as we'd like. It needs to be done right. The permits are only given once. We proposed a list of permit conditions a couple of years ago, and only one permit's been issued to Ski Run Marina. Tiffany included much of what we requested in that permit, the only example we've seen, but there's still some pieces missing. Checklists for concessionaires to make sure the permit conditions are being met, secret shopper spot checks, which are vital to compliance. There haven't been a lot of requests for permits as we understand it. So we'd like to see TRPA take a more proactive approach to get to reach out to potential concessionaires and to enforce kind of what are currently non-permitted operations. The AIS management plans is the fourth one. Those were supposed to be done in December of 2021. We hear they're going to be done this summer, which is great, but Ski Run got their permit without having an AIS management plan. So just kind of highlighting that and making sure that the management plans get done this year. So as I said, happy to talk about those 4 things over and over. As Shelley said, shoreline is not easy. We look forward to continue to work with TRPA and all the on-water people and making sure this all gets implemented as soon as possible. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Gavin. Appreciate those comments. In response from staff.
Yes, so we coordinate with the League to Save Lake Tahoe staff on a fairly regular basis and are very aware of their concerns regarding implementation. I'll speak directly to those AIS management plans. We have put in, we have worked, our AIS staff as well as us with Lahontan staff have worked on creating some guidelines and templates for those AIS management plans. So we are going to be rolling those out this year in coordination with the Marina Association specifically. I believe we're going to be attending and presenting these AIS management plans at an upcoming Marina Association meeting. So that is well underway and definitely a necessary part of implementation. The concessions, when we talk about concessions, just, you know, for those who don't know, we're talking about the rental of either motorized or non-motorized equipment. And this happens all over the lake, as we know. And we are really on an education and outreach campaign to get these folks to come into TRPA for a permit. The caveat being that we can't always issue permits for these types of operations. And in fact, the cases where we can issue permits for these operations under the confines of the code is fairly limited. That said, we have been working with marinas, the public land managers, the ramp operators to get on the same page and make sure that we are all kind of addressing the same set of rules and really educating those that are trying to operate in the various ways that they are trying to operate. So we have had a handful of concessions permits come in that we are dealing with, but it's still getting these folks to come in and apply to us is kind of the stage that we're in right now. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to address, but I think those are the main highlights.
Well, you know, Gavin brought up the fact that I guess we were contemplating having MOUs with local law enforcement. I know there's still an issue with, excuse me, with conflicting speed limits in Emerald Bay, having to do with the El Dorado County folks. But you know, these are independently elected, you know, officers in the case of sheriffs who are in charge of implementing rules and regulations. So, I mean, you have to be a little bit diplomatic in your negotiations with these folks because they are independent. And maybe we can reach some sort of reasonable compromise. I don't know, Brooke, did you have something to add?
No, just that I have a meeting coming up next week to address.
Perfect.
Yeah, 25 miles an hour versus 5.
Yes. Okay. Cut the baby in half. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. I'll let Steve Sweet know. He'll appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. Look, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Maria, any other members of the public wishing to ask a question online?
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Then we will close public comment on this item. And that brings us to the next agenda item, which is number 7, upcoming topics. So what, in addition to CTC, do we have on our upcoming agenda?
I'll try to keep this short because we're way long. Just a reminder that it's starting to get into budget season and stuff. So for our internal budgets, so next month, April, you have the governing board offsite where we'll discuss strategic initiatives and plans. And then in May and June, we will try to bring you a budget for the TRPA for next year. I just ask you to be a little generous because 2 out of the 3 people on my staff we're going to be working with me on this are new. I have never even seen the TRPA budget. So it's going to be an educational process for them.
Good
and for
luck,
my
Chris.
staff.
All right, okay. Thank you for that. Any comments or questions by members of the committee? Yes, Vince.
Yeah, I was wondering, given that we have a lot of public comment on certain issues and it's been pushing us to where we don't have a quorum and we have to stop our business and things are continuously being pushed. Could we, for this committee, really document the public meeting process so that if there's a lot of public comment, we can respond to it on an issue and make sure that it doesn't push our business back to,
You mean
for-
in advance of the meeting, have people submit their comments in advance of the meeting?
or, you know, just the process, we're seeing how many comments are upcoming and where we can adjust the amount of time that people get if it's going to be too much.
You know, about all we can do is to ask public commenters not to repeat what's already been said. That's about all we can do without limiting free speech. Yes, John.
I think we would be happy to do an agenda item at the Ops Committee next month, presenting some strategies that were mutually developed. And I know we've been consulting with a couple board members on those and kind of lay out a process by which to handle public comment that they can address some of the concerns that members have about hearing you know, extensive public comments and how to manage that at the same time, ensuring that the public have an opportunity to speak to the board.
Okay. You
Yeah, I
just
think if
love
we-
to come to our ops meetings. I know it.
Yes.
Okay.
I think if we just make it more public what the process is, then everyone can respond to it and be heard. And we can get our business done as well. So,
Okay, well, let's
hoping we
let's
can
have
do
that conversation and consider some options. Okay, thank you, Vince. Any other comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, then we will move to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Seeing only staff in the audience, we will move on to any folks who may be joining us virtually. Maria?
Madam Chair, there's no public comment.
Okay, then we will close public comment, move on to agenda item number 8, committee member comments. Any further members wishing to make comments prior to the adjournment of the committee? Okay, seeing none, let's see, is Gabriel still with us? Gabriel?
I sure am, and I do not have any comments. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. All right, so we will move on to our final matter of business, which is a general public interest comment period. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee at this time, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone. You will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Maria, any final comments by members of the public?
Madam Chair, there is no final public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thanks, Vince. Okay. All right, Maria, will you please call the roll? We've amended that, haven't we? Yet, okay. Right, historically. Okay, all right. All those in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. The legal